everything. Right, so today we're going to be looking at the wonderful area of caves in the Mesolithic period. And we're going to be doing it from a little bit of a strange angle. So, fiddlesticks. There you go. So, okay, you can see that. So, we're going to be looking at 4 places today. One in Ireland, in County Clare. We're going to be looking generally in the Highlands of Scotland. We'll be looking down in the Mendips, and here as well, which is the Gower. And in the Mesolithic period, caves are very, very interesting sites indeed, as we shall see now. Wonderful bits of interesting evidence, and everything that you may have thought about caves is very different from what we're going to do today. And I understand the likes of Bethany Hughes has helped me out on that score, because Bethany Hughes agrees with me, and I agree with her, that the Mesolithic period was a lot more complicated. There was all those ideas of farming and looking after trees and all the rest of it. They were far more advanced in the Mesolithic period. We now know now than we did 10 years ago. And we're principally looking at caves today. So let's look at this image. Can't really see much about it, and it's not very clear at all, but it's the best I can do. But on here, from the Mesolithic period, approximately 8,000–9,000 years ago, in one of the caves known as Avalyn Cave down in the Mendips, and we've already shown you the locality. There's Avalyn Cave, and there's Longhole. It's part of the Cheddar Gorge network of caves, near Goth's Cave and all the ones that we've mentioned. And we haven't mentioned Wookey Hole, but there you go. And this period that we're talking about, we're coming into another period of art, a very unusual art, where they're making linear lines on rock, later on circular motifs, and also crosses. We've got a line of 2 crosses, which date from the Mesolithic period. And why is this significant? Well, those that are into art will know that probably drawing an animal is a lot more simple than drawing an asymmetrical cross, or a cross that actually looks like a cross. Trying to gouge out a straight line on a piece of rock is a lot more difficult than drawing a mammoth. So drawing mammoths come from an early stage, Paleolithic, 12,000 years ago, and drawing crosses and lines and later on spirals and all the rest of it on rocks comes a lot later. So the period we're looking at is the Mesolithic period, and these come from Avalyn Cave. But moving on, we want to do these images as much as we can. One thing that you can clearly say about caves is that caves themselves haven't moved or changed much in time. So if you go back 12,000, 14,000 years ago, or for us 9,000 years ago, you were looking in Avalyn Cave. That's practically the same view that you'd see 9,000 years ago as you see today. So in other words, this cave has not travelled in time, and nor have the artefacts in the cave either. They've remained there and stayed put. One of the things about these caves is that we try to keep them safe. Not from people destroying what's in them, because most people act responsibly in cave, cavers and so on. We try to protect against bacteria. In these caves, lots of these caves, particularly in France, you even get preserved from the Paleolithic period and the Mesolithic period footprints of young children and adults that were laid down 8,000, 10,000, 12,000 years ago. They're all preserved in the muds in these caves. And the thing is, you don't want to disturb them. You can't send a group of tourists in there and expect them not to do any damage, because they will. So lots of these caves have been graded and added a sense of protection from them, even from bacteria. In Lascaux, in France, the reconstruction Lascaux caves were constructed to protect the actual cave painters at Lascaux from the Paleolithic period from any further damage. And the damage come in people's perspiration and their bacteria. And that bacteria would attack the beautiful paintings at Lascaux. And we've got the same problem with our cave art in this country. Up until 2003, Hardly any cave art was believed to have existed in Britain. It was believed that we were backwards, we didn't have any form of agriculture, we didn't have any settlement, we didn't have any form of anything, and we weren't able to even produce cave art. All of that has now been proven to be completely false. We did all those things. And there is one of the crosses. Now, why are these crosses significant? They're found in Longhole Cave and in other localities in France and elsewhere. They're from the Mesolithic period, and it's significant. And don't fall for this trap, so don't interrupt. They're significant because you've got left, you've got the left to the bottom. That's gouged in first, and the more deeper line is gouged from the top to the bottom. This is shown on all the crosses. The mistake is, don't think that right-handed people are going to sort of gouge that there and then gouge it that way. It's not as simple as that, actually. You need to use flint tools to actually gouge into the rock. So me and Anne are going out into a cave. As part of our steaming relationship. And Anne says to me, get your penknife out and put into the rock, Karl loves Anne, right? So there I am with my penknife trying to etch in A and a heart and K, and it's just not going to work. Without a bit of pressure on this into the rock, you're not going to be able to create a line, let alone a curve. And the point is that effort was used to create these. It's not just a simple matter of going, right, let's just get in there. Sort of. A is perfect, actually, but it's going to be a lot of effort. And if you can't do that with a metal tool, you're going to really struggle with a flint tool. So you need to put a bit of effort on that flint tool using a bit of a wooden mattock. And before you mention iron, Bill, shut up. One thing about this, in these articles that we're going to do today, we've got the idea of microclimates. Okay, the microclimate. And the idea with a microclimate is that you might get really cold temperatures around there. But here, you're going to have a warmer climate for people to live and survive and to understand and to set well in their landscape to live, basically. Microclimates are really, really important. And when you think about a cave, the average temperature in a cave is roughly about 11.5 degrees C all year round. You can have minus a million outside, where it's going to be 11.5 degrees C inside the cave. In the summer months, you might get 36 degrees C outside, where it's 11.5 degrees inside. Because caves keep their temperature. That's not the microclimate I'm on about. I'm on about a valley, which is fairly raised, really high up, it's really sheltered, loads of trees. And you might get out there with the surrounding landscape, the surrounding plains, wind blown and all the rest of it. You might get minus 20 degrees C, but in that nice little sort of gorge, which is in the right geology. There's no point being too far down, no point being too far up, but you've got trees there, and you've got a beautiful, interesting landscape, and the temperature's plus 5 degrees C. That's known as a microclimate. Bill didn't have the guts to do it on the 2 occasions that we went there, but when we went to the island of Hoy, I wanted to get to Berriedale Wood. After 2 hours, I managed to get to Berriedale Wood with Michelle and the children. It was a really intense slog over 1 mile. So you can imagine it took 2 hours to do 1 mile, Bill, didn't it? It was, even when Bill tried to do the route with me the first time around, we didn't get there. But went to a place called Berriedale Wood. As you go to Berriedale Wood, you've got wind swept and there's a big cold and all the rest of it. So you get there. And actually, when you're in the wood, it's warm, it's clement, and you think you're on another planet. That's what we mean by a microclimate. So they did exist. Our ancestors appreciated warmth as we do today. I got my back heels on, yeah. It's a really nice hype. We're not talking about temperatures like that, but what we're talking about are temperatures that people could cope and live and be happy. Skin their animals, to look after their animals. And I've really got to chuck something else in there as well, which is really important. People who study archaeology and history, and you guys and me and everybody else, we always assume that people go to caves as a last resort. They're living or using these caves in the Mesolithic period when they don't need to. Okay, that's really, really important. They don't need to use them, but they're using them for burial or putting these crosses in there. Some parts of the world, caves might be complete taboo. You might avoid them. We know in the Paleolithic period, certain caves in the Mendip landscape, where Cheddar Gorges, that landscape, some caves themselves weren't used in the Paleolithic, but they were used in the Mesolithic. Another point to be made is that just because there's a cave up there today, right, and it's up there in the valley, it doesn't mean to say it wasn't accessible for our ancestors. There's 2 points. The point is that some archaeologists will find a cave up there and we're standing down at your level. The archaeologists say that the water has eroded the valley and taken the level down. So that cave that was once accessible by walking along is no longer accessible because it's further up. Okay? That may be the case, but in most cases it isn't. Having a cave up there means that the cave itself has more meaning. You've got to make an effort to get to it. The reason why we can sort of prove that is if you go to places like Peru and you go to the Nabatean towns and villages in Jordan, you see caves up there, right? And you think, why are the people buried up there? How did they get up there? They got up there because it was a bit of a rite of passage to get up there. What they're finding in these caves in the Paleolithic and Mesolithic period, at whatever level these caves were on, whether they were always up on that level and you couldn't access them normally or you were able to access them, whatever way you want to look at it, what we do find in these caves are the remains of human beings and animals. Now, it's always assumed when you find the remains of animals in a cave that those animals themselves were butchered to death, were taken up there by human beings. And they were used for their skins and everything else. But we need not to think like that. I'm going to ask a nice sensitive question. How many of you have ever had a dog that's died? How many of you buried it in your garden? Oh, come on. All right, 2 of you. Good.
Sorry.
You buried.
I've had an animal that I've buried.
That's fine. That's what I want. That's what I want. Let's bury it in the garden. Right? That's what I want. That's what I want. Right? Now, that is something that we do today, and why didn't they do it in the past? They took an animal to a cave and buried it with respect. Why not? Archaeologists always assume that whenever they find these bones in a cave, they've been taken there by a human being and they've been butchered and all the rest of it. But lots of the evidence say that we may have taken animals there and respectfully buried them. And why not? Because we did it with our loved ones. And look at this other approach as well. I mentioned about cannibalism the other week, that we take our loved ones to a cave and we'd eat their flesh and all the rest of it. There's marks on their bones, but we love those people. We bury them with respect, but we ate their flesh. What about the same with a pet goat, for example, or a pet dog, pet wolf? You're not killing the animal because it's a wolf. The animal's already dead, but you're consuming the flesh. So it's all these different things you've got to look at, because things in the past are very different from the textbook. So in other words, you're not just using the cave as a last resort. You're using it for so many other things. And in fact, we now know that caves have used all the way through the past. They used, when we think about prehistoric people, we think about clubs and women being dragged in caves and all the rest of it, and that's where they lived, right? Forget that. Iron Age, they're using caves, and in the Bronze Age before that, 4,000 years ago, they're smelting bronze in the cave. Don't know how that works, because you need air coming in and air going out, but we've got evidence of bronze smelting in caves, and Roman people using caves, and medieval people using caves, and guess what? We're still using caves today if you go down a Rogoff. And if you're a speleologist, you're a caver, you're using a cave as well. So all of these things are really, really relevant. And one question that I had in Lancet Major today at the end was that have I ever felt or sensed anything in a cave? And the answer from me was no. It's a bit of a stupid question to be answering me because I do ghost walks and stuff. But the answer actually was no. And then I actually said, well, actually, even if I did sense anything in the cave, it would be my acute problem with claustrophobia. If I get claustrophobia at the wrong time, I get into a real mess. I've not really had it. You've not seen me have claustrophobia on the ground or anything, Bill, have you?
Not from claustrophobia. I've seen something different.
Yeah.
For other reasons.
Yeah, but not claustrophobia. No. So I haven't had claustrophobia. But if I had claustrophobia, I'd be in a real panic state. Now, so you ask somebody else who's normal, like Dorothy, right? Have you ever been in a cave?
Yes.
Ever felt or sensed anything?
No.
I haven't either, really. And they're those strange places that seem to be capsules of time, where time has stood still. Completely stood still. Anyway, let's move on. Now, these are caves in the Highlands of Scotland. Okay, they're in the Highlands of Scotland, and what you're looking at now is a little bit different from what they looked at in the past. There'd be a bit more rock overhanging. Remember, this is about 8,000 years ago. You've got a bit of a valley there, dropping away, and maybe what they saw that this was covered in trees.
Those sheep there can't get a scale.
Sheep there. Sheep.
I'm just getting somebody a scale.
I think they are sheep. So you're actually looking down on it. So these are actually quite big caves. There's a place called Asilt in Scotland, where I'm doing it with a Welsh accent in the Highlands. And the idea is you can imagine all that covered with trees, all that sort of covered up. And you can imagine these big mounds, these big entrances in the Highlands in Scotland would have a completely different sense of what they were about and what they were used for all those thousands of years ago. So even though inside the cave hasn't changed, everything outside has. Absolutely everything outside of the cave. So a cave can store information where the outside doesn't need to store information, vis-a-vis this. What we know about caves is that very little in the form of life lives in caves. Yeah, you do get the odd newts and the odd sort of salamanders, spiders, and blind mice and all the rest of it. But you don't get many creatures living in caves. You don't get many plants living in caves. You have the odd mosses, the odd mushrooms and stuff, but not much lives in a cave. So anything that an archaeologist does find in a cave has been brought from outside. It's been brought from outside by a human, by an animal, or it's naturally blown in. So vis-a-vis this, right? You've got a hazelnut, right? And that hazelnut is found way deep in the back of the cave. It's found all the way back at the back of the cave, 250 meters into the back of the cave. Lots of these caves are really deep. It's found all the way into the back, right? The only one way that could have got there was that it's been taken there for some reason, by an animal or a human being, or it's been washed in by natural elements. Naturally, if it's on a slope, right, and there's no water really coming into it, then obviously it's been taken in by human or animal reasons. If you can radiocarbon a hazelnut to say 8,000 years ago, that tells you 8,000 years ago there were hazelnuts growing in that valley. I know it sounds obvious, but it's not. It's not obvious at all. That evidence, and there's no hazelnut trees growing there today. But 8,000 years there were, and that's what is so magical about this. That's what's so magical. And we've got loads of little bits and pieces today. And there's a lady in the County Clare caves that have been, which were found in 1903, that have only been really standardly excavated now. And one thing we're saying about these caves is two things. It's a shame that they were dug out by antiquarians to such a degree that, all the bones were put in boxes, we didn't really know where they come from and all the rest of it 100, 150 years ago. And then they're taken to museums and put on shelves, right? It's a big shame because we lost a lot of information. Even Reverend Buckland, when he got back to his office in mid-January 1823, and he's been to Powerland, right? And he's sat there in his desk in Oxford. He's thinking, right, I like that mammoth skull. Love it. Nice. Yeah. All right. I'll see you in the morning, mammoth skull, right? He gets back in the morning. It's gone. Reverend Buckland always says that the mammoth skull fell on the floor somewhere in his big office, right? And he couldn't find it again, right? We always get stories like that from Antiquaries. That's a real genuine one from a professor. Or so he called himself. But the point is, on the better side is in places like County Clare, and places like Cheddar, lots of this stuff were put in boxes and left and not studied, not contaminated, not even washed, right? Even though the contexts were lost and all the rest of it. In comes the Second World War. Second World War, lots of these caves were used to store armaments, were used as last-ditch locations if the Germans had invaded. They were going to be the places that we would attempt to organise our guerrilla warfare from. Okay, so you can imagine all that would have destroyed everything anyway. So what we do have, it's good that we've got it, even though it was not found in the best circumstances. And that's interesting as well. Why is that interesting? We'll come on to that in a short while. We'll do the full article. That's the cave as well. There you go in 1903 with a box of finds there into this cave. Gentlemen excavating, doing their bit. And again, there's pros and cons.
Like a hat.
Oh, lovely hat, is it? Oh, it's lovely little feathers there. All dressed up. And all the archaeologists look dressed up as well. My new car up there, my Peugeot 308.
Good new car?
Yeah, you've seen, haven't you?
I am.
Do you think it's any good, George?
Not unless I drove it.
Is it a diesel?
It's a diesel, yeah.
Yeah, we got Peugeot 308.
Have you?
Pardon?
What year is it?
Not yet.
2008.
That's
Same
2009.
build,
BMW engine.
Is it?
Yeah, ours is.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, Michelle was saying, I'm so ashamed of you driving in that car. I'm not going to get in it again. You'll have to get a new one. Anyway.
Well,
Sorry.
it wasn't going, was it?
No, it wasn't. Anyway, look at this. We're going to come on to this in a minute, and there's a story behind it. But that's a bear patella from 12,500 years ago, right? And there's human marks on it. Does that mean to say that this bear was butchered in the cave? It dropped dead, and they decided, and no sooner it stopped breathing, they decided to harvest the body. But it didn't mean to say that they killed it. Trying to kill a bear is very, very difficult. Okay? If you corner a bear in a cave, it'll kill all of you, and then it'll die itself. So, you don't work with bears. And so somebody said to me, today, well, they lived in these caves, didn't they? And I said, well, they didn't go exactly too far deep in these caves, because if they did, and they woke up a hibernating bear, they wouldn't come out alive. Which I've said on a number of occasions. Obviously, looking more in these caves in County Clare in Ireland, and there we go, apartment 3.
Oh,
Eight clowns.
What's that?
A clown's mask, 8 clowns.
We don't want that. No, that's a film I'm working. Right, so we've got this now, and don't really try and read what's there. Let me read what's there and sort of interpret it. So up until about 2004, we didn't have many caves in Britain, or much evidence for cave art anywhere in Britain. Since 2004, we've found loads of it, particularly in the Mendips. We are fortunate to look at the Mendips today, and we've got wonderful Paleolithic and Mesolithic archaeology. So those are the locations. We're going to Evelyn Longhole, associated with the Cheddar Gorge, and with all this being said, excavations have been undertaken in the caves, and actually, weirdly enough, this actually links with some evidence in France. The French used to say, "Look at us, we have got the wonderful Lascaux cave, and you have got nothing." I don't know what accent that was, but now we're starting to find this art. It's really, really interesting. And there you go. There's the crosses on the stone itself. Adeline Hole, and they've been finding this using LED lights, searching for representational art, not engraved lines. Now, what was happening is for many years, people in Britain were looking for mammoths and all sorts of things that would go up to the light in our caves, and really weren't finding them because they weren't looking for the right things. We now know that our caves are heavily engraved with crosses and engraved lines, whatever they mean. Shortly after, whilst reporting on the progress of the project, we mentioned the engraved lines and their appearance of age. and were surprised at the interest they generated. And because they're similar designs like this actually found in France as well. So they therefore undertook to verify exactly what they were looking at. And in the process of verification, they started using skills that had been developed in places like Cresswell Crags, in Scandinavia, and so on and so on. And the one amazing thing with all this cave art is that a patina is created on the surface. And what we mean by patina, fine, really fine, minuscule layers, really, really thin, of deposits, calcite, lime deposits being built up on these over time. In fact, the layers are so thin. If you think of a piece of paper, a normal sort of 120 gram piece of paper, you'd be talking about 1/120th of that thickness of paper. You know how thick paper is? We're just talking about that. So we're talking about such a thin layer that can be looked under a microscope, and these layers are formed over this art. Now it is art. Well, anything can be called art these days anyway, but it's really important. And this is at the Avalon Hole, and they've gated it off. The photographs themselves, the excavations, determined that direct dating methods could be used by looking directly at the rock, because as they looked down at the ground, it had all been disturbed and they didn't really have the information that they could differentiate it from modern graffiti and graffiti throughout the ages. So they actually confirmed that the engravings themselves were between 8,000 and 9,000 years old. They're now scheduled and protected ancient monuments. There's what we're talking about. They put a gate on it to protect it, and then we come in with something really, really interesting. What we come in with really, really interesting is we know from before, with the representations of these lines, that they actually found something else in there. The key to understanding Avalon's Hole, through its archaeology and history, is to look at what they've already found there. Not this cave art found in 2004 or whatever. The archaeology has recently been the subject of an in-depth restudy. And this work tells us that they found a cemetery dating probably to 9,000, 10,000 years ago, a Mesolithic cemetery. Around the same time that we've got the most complete set of skeletal remains found at Goth's Cave, not so far away. And then, a few years after, in date, that body was laid to rest in Goth's Cave, again in the Cheddar Gorge. People were starting to inter bodies at Avalon Cave in the Mendips, and these 50 bodies were interred in the cave for over 120 years. That was seen to be unusual, but in other parts of the world it's not unusual. You know, anyone that's watched any programs about the Inca will know that they love to bury their loved ones in caves, high up in weird little precipices that you could only get there using a 500-meter ladder or something. You know, these really silly dimensions, but they managed to get the skeletal remains in there and so on. So we've got something similar in this country, and we're starting to build up this story. We always used to think that people lived in caves and that's all they did in them. Now we know that they did lots of other things. The cave itself remained sealed until 1797, and it wasn't until over 200 years later that they actually started to find these wonderful lines, because nobody was actually looking for them. And they're very similar to ones that have actually been found in France. I'll go into this. The engraved panel of these crosses themselves. The engraved panel consists of 2 rows of crosses, with 6 crosses in the top row and 4 crosses in the lower row. And there's a panel about this big, about that deep, with these beautiful crosses. When I say beautiful, they are beautiful because they're 9,000 years old. And why get so excited about crosses? Well, somebody went through the effort of creating rows of crosses. That's why. You can say that sounds silly, you know. Some people can say that Leonardo da Vinci's work today being sold for $450 million is silly. It's still art. Picasso being sold for £10 million, just a bit of blue there, a bit of black, that's art. This is art, and you know it is, and yourself. Geometric.
you know, like you say, it's simpler to just imagine, you know.
Yes.
Or imagine a beast, you know, or, you know.
It's set, it's formed, and you.
Figurative.
Yes.
Figurative, or,
Yes.
what do you call it?
Abstract. This is abstract.
This is
And you've got-
abstract,
yes.
yeah.
So Anne's point is really important. Yes. Anne's point is really important. We've progressed from drawing animals, which are figurative and out of your mind maybe, to something that you're actually clearly creating. It might be abstract, but you're clearly creating it, and that's the point. My God, Anne, that's the first sensible thing you've said in ages. At first sight, the crosses seem to form a continuous lattice.
Been working up to it, haven't we?
But you haven't said anything useful for years, Dorothy, so don't worry.
Well, I haven't got anything useful to say.
I know, don't worry about it. Bill hasn't said anything at all. Pat's always asleep, so there you go.
Yes, you just know you are asleep.
Yes, you've been getting up all the time.
But although the lines are sub-parallel and come close together, each cross does form a distinctive image, so they're individual crosses, they don't overlap. The engraved lines are approximately 1 millimeter wide and shallower than they are broad. They show a slight asymmetry in width and unevenness in depth, but they are clear crosses. Characteristics of having been made with a stone edge rather than a metal tool, Bill. Close examination shows that in each case where the sequence is clear, the line running from the upper left to lower right was cut first, before the line from the upper right to the lower left. And you can clearly see that when I bring this back up. There you go. And the thinner, fainter line has been done first, and a thicker, more active line has been done secondly. And these may have actually been decorated and painted, but all of that is seemingly gone. Maybe we didn't have the right ochres in this country. One thing that needs to be said is always archaeological interpretations of these things. Archaeologists almost think that, you know, either these things are not significant or they're over significant. They don't sort of go in the middle. And a metaphor for this is as follows. A few years ago we had our conference in Wenbo, and there was this farmer come along called Norman Jenkins. And Norman Jenkins told us all a story, and he said he was up wandering across the mountains of West Wales this one day, and this archaeologist went up to him and got really excited. And he said, wow, we found this sort of bank-like thing like this on a hill, and there's another line going like this to form a cross, right? And it's a major significant find. It's obviously clear proof that there's a Christian settlement up there, and this cross thing is absolutely whatever. And Norman turned around and said, have you actually looked on your maps? And he said, no, they probably didn't record it in the past. And Norman said, well, I created it. Because that cross itself is up there because when the sheep are sort of caught out there and they can't make their way back, they can avoid the wind by sheltering in one of the 4 bits of the cross. And the archaeologist said, no, that can't be right. You couldn't have created this. Oh, by the way, and the archaeologist said, there's another one over there as well. You couldn't have done both. And Norman said, no, I didn't. My dad did the other one. And the point is, the metaphor for this is trying to understand these things and just trying to get a basic notion of what they are. When you say art, they're not really art. They've got more meaning than a sense of art can give. You know, maybe somebody drawing those animals in caves, you know, were just, it was all coming out of their mind. It may not have done anything in the Paleolithic period, but these crosses have a reason. They're done as a certain ritual, okay? And that's got some significance. The engraved lines show a degree of patination weathering, so they are not recent. Modern graffitis are mainly known to consist of identifiable writing, often dates, initials, or a combination of both. Sometimes they can be representational in form, but abstract designs are similarly less common. There are comparisons to be made with lots of this art, whether it's new or old, but the stuff that we've got Avalon Hole is definitely of Mesolithic date. And not only are we actually finding examples of this in France, there's an example of an engraved horse jaw from Kendrick's Cave in good old England from approximately about 12,000 years ago. And it's engraved with similar marks to the ones found in the cave. And that's really interesting. It's on a horse jaw, and it's got similar designs to Avalon. And why is that significant? We don't know. But there's all these links going over to France as well. So we've got another site which is next door called Long Hole. A little bit more detail, but we'll get through this a bit more quicker. The second site, which has yielded engravings that may be of similar age, is Long Hole. But as I said, Cheddar Gorge, Somerset, which are found at different levels, having been abandoned in turn as the underground river, which formed them, cut deeper and deeper into the limestone. Maybe that happened, maybe it didn't. What we're talking about is a cave up there, river, stream cutting lower, cave isolated, and so on. That might not always be the case. It's a bit misleading, that. And obviously the famous Cheddar Man found in Goss Cave is the oldest articulated human remains, as we've already said. We've got lots of human remains in Avalon's Hole. But back to Long Hole. If you ever type Long Hole into the computer, you come up with Long Hole Cave on the Gower. So don't go there. Long Hole is an elliptical tube leading back into the hillside for a total of 250 metres. Probably a little bit more overhang back in the day, but that's been eroded away. The engravings found in Long Hole were found 70 metres from the entrance. Now, if ever I asked anybody in the room, where would you think cave art would be, so people can find it, right? It's going to be there. So you go in, you can say, a bit of cave art there, it looks lovely. You can have a bit of light on it, it looks perfect. Lots of this art is actually found deep within caves. Obviously, they didn't have Karl-james lamps, or they didn't have battery-operated lamps, or electricity, or LEDs, or anything like that. But these were actually formed nevertheless. And it would have had to have been done by two people. One person holding a torch, and the other person actually creating the crosses in the first place. So it was actually effort. It was actually effort to do this. And what's more is this. That's not the actual end of the cave. The way on from this chamber is up an awkward 5-metre climb, and so it may be regarded as the effective end of the cave. So what we do, we're talking about changes in the cave. It's quite a complicated cave indeed. And there are 3 other separate engravings in the network, all these abstract lines, 3 lines and crosses, various different groups. And the lines appear to have been cut by stone tools, not iron, Bill. And obviously patination, giving it a sense of date. There are other sets of graffiti in the cave from over the years, and it goes to show that these caves were used for a considerable length of time. Although abstract designs are found in the Paleolithic, they are almost always in conjunction with representational art. So obviously mammoth, auroch, lines. Here, no mammoth, no auroch, just lines, and later on, spirals and circles. It is important to note the attribution of these engravings is far less secure than that of Avalon's Hole. Long Hole itself has been used for a very, very long time, into the Roman period, and graffiti dating from 1668. And as they were excavated at Long Hole, they found out that lots of the archaeology on the floor had been completely disturbed. Whatever was there had been completely lost in time. But at Avalon, it is pretty secure. We know exactly what's going on there. And engravings from the Mesolithic period, we might think that the dates vary. They're obviously not all from the same time, but they're very important. Interpretation, we'll have a break after this. A very short break, 5 minutes. It must be stressed that this work is very much in its early stages, and that, as yet, the entire body of art is still very small. And so any attempts of interpreting intentions of its makers must be extremely tentative. So We don't really know what this stuff is about, but we've got burials associated with them and other things associated with them as well. And it's got a few other bits and pieces there, not really relevant to what we're doing. So we'll move on from that now. And what I'm going to do is we've got a bit of an article of the week, if I can get it. And here we go. This sort of brings us on to the break.
Oh, I didn't tell you about that earlier.
Well, you didn't know, Bill, did you?
It's in Georgia, isn't it?
Georgia, yeah.
Yeah.
In the United States. I'm only joking. Georgia, south of Russia. Evidence of the world's earliest winemaking uncovered by archaeologists. Humans made grape wine hundreds of years earlier than previously believed, according to analysis of clay pottery dating back 8,000 years ago. A series of excavations in Georgia has uncovered evidence of the world's earliest winemaking in the form of telltale traces within clay pottery dating back to 8,000 years ago, suggesting that the practice of making grape wine began hundreds of years earlier than previously thought. While there are thousands of cultivars of wine around the world, they all derive from one single grape, the Eurasian grape. So Dorothy, when you're next drinking wine, you're like this, little bit of a wine bottle, you're going like this. Just remember that taste, that very grape that gave you that taste,
No, I won't.
has an ancestry of 8,000 years. Oh, shut up. I was trying to involve you on an academic level. Until now, the oldest jars known to have contained wine dated to 7,000 years ago from Iran. The latest find pushes it back 1,000 years. When we pick up a glass of wine and put it to our lips and taste it, we are recapitulating that history that goes back at least 8,000 years. The find comes after a team of archaeologists and botanists in Georgia excavate near the capital city of Georgia, Tbilisi. The site offers a glimpse into a culture that is long lost, a culture of circular mud brick homes, tools made of stone and bone, and the farming of cattle, pigs, wheat and barley. And whilst they rested, they would drink their wine. So there you go, there it is. There it is, in that area. The place to be. Researchers were particularly intrigued by fired clay pots in the region. Indeed, one representative jar from a nearby settlement is a metre tall and a metre wide and could hold more than 300 litres. I did ask somebody in my Landscape Major class how long would it take for them to drink that, and they said not long. A weekend. That's a lot, isn't it?
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
That's 200 bottles.
200 bottles.
Oh, right, okay then.
So when Anne took me to a restaurant one day and treated me to a meal and bought me a glass of wine, right? She didn't tell me it was it didn't tell me it was a glass which contained half a litre of bloody wine.
Oh, it wasn't that big.
It bloody was, and I was pissed, and I started chatting at the waiter. I did.
Oh, you did?
I did. What's more, it was decorated with blobs. Researchers say the clusters of grapes. There you go. There you can see them there. There you go. Little blobs.
Looks like leather, doesn't it?
Looks like leather. Bill knows all about leather. To explore whether winemaking was indeed a part of life in the region, the team focused on collecting and analysing fragments of pottery from 2 Neolithic villages, as well as soil samples. Radiocarbon dating of grains and charcoal nearby suggests the pots date to 8,000 years ago. In total, 30 pottery fragments and 26 soil samples were examined, with the inside surface of the pottery ground down a little to produce a powder for analysis. While many of the pieces were collected in recent excavations to date back to the 1960s, and it was believed that they might show traces that they may have been used to store wine. Now we know that they did. Using various analytical techniques, looking at the fine molecules and the mass associated, they found that the team found traces of tartaric acid, the substance found in grapes in large quantities. Tests on the associated soils largely showed far lower levels of the acid. So in other words, tartaric acid on the pottery, around in the surrounding soil, not much acid, so there must have been something stored in that pottery. Okay. The team also identified the presence of 3 other acids linked to grapes and wine. Other evidence indicated the presence of wine included ancient grape pollen found at the excavated site, but not in the topsoil, as well as grape starch particles, the remains of a fruit fly. I don't know what that's got to do with wine. And cells believed to be from the surface of grapevines on the inside of one of the fragments.
Flies can turn wine into vinegar.
Yes, they can. They can. They do, yes. While the team note that it is possible that the vessels were used to store something other than wine, such as grapes themselves, they note that the shape of the vessels is suited to holding a liquid, and that the grapes or raisins would have degraded without trace, and therefore not left a stain on the pottery. Moreover, there are none of the telltale signs that the pots were used for syrup making, while grape juice would have fermented within a matter of days. The findings suggest the sites, the localities, sort of outdate the findings in Iran. And they've got wine, evidence of wine being made in Iran dating back to 7,400 years ago. Older remnants of winemaking have also been found at Jinyai site in China's Hainan province, dating back to 9,000 years ago, but they don't believe it was true wine. True wine has to only be made from grapes, doesn't it, Bill? Yeah. It can't be made from a fermented liquid of hawthorn, fruit, grapes, rice beer, and honey mead. It has to be real wine. Mind you, we had a big row in Lanford Major today. It ended up somebody having to go out the room. With their narrow base, the large clay pots used do not stand up easily, suggesting they might have been half buried in the ground during the winemaking process, as was the case for the Iranian vessels. It's said that certainly the example of the oldest pure grape wine in the world. The excavations in Georgia are well sponsored. I just think I am now going to be a Georgian for a moment. The Georgians are absolutely ecstatic. They have been saying for years that we have a very long history of winemaking, and so we're really cementing that position. Anyone else producing wine in the world is far inferior to ours, because this is me being Borat now, we are the home of winemaking.
You'll see a few drunken Georgians in Cardiff on Saturday.
Really? Are they playing rugby? Fair enough. Did Wales beat Panama in the football the other night? 1-1. Okay, fair enough. Who's the South American team? Right. Okay, we're going to take a break now, as quick as possible, and then because I got a ghost walk tonight, so a couple of minutes.
What about questions?
Oh, any questions whilst we do the tea?
Yes.
Go for it.
The X-shaped rocker.
Avalon hole and the long hole. Yes.
And this is the tones how they did that, because obviously that's limestone area, isn't it?
It is carboniferous rock. You know it's not easy to carve into carboniferous rock.
Like a limestone, my garden wall is limestone. I know that can feel a bit like flint. You get a very sharp edge.
Yes.
So you can.
Yeah, but have you got Lias limestone, haven't you? Is it
Is
dark? Is it like a dark colour or a light colour? Light blue. Yeah. It's Lias.
But that eczema, that line was so red.
Yes.
I suspect that the sharp edge, we didn't gouge it out with a crude chisel, but they actually did this. That was all along the line to get that red mark.
Well,
That's what I think.
I think I'm actually going to.
I'm speculating that's the way you would have done it.
Because if you look at this image again, I know you're talking about rubbing into it, right? But it looks like it's definitely been done. Hang on. Where's that image? There. That doesn't look like it's been grounded. There's a clear.
Yeah, I can see it now. It's not exactly straight. It's starting to get chiseled.
Yes. So there's two people doing this. One person shining, because you can't just do these willy-nilly. And to do a straight line is really difficult. It really is. To do a circle is quite fairly straightforward.
One of Picasso's most expensive paintings is a straight line.
Is it? Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well. I'm talking about well, and it's in your house. Talking about well. We'll take a quick break, a quickie. And we'll do the money as well. What? I think I should just invade Poland.
So, I mean, we used to come at 2:45.
We'll say 2 o'clock because I'm always late.
Well, and
Yeah.
here we go. There it is. Right. New discovery pushes back date of human existence in Ireland by 2,500 years by looking at caves. Generally, just looking at Paleolithic caves and looking at Mesolithic caves. This sort of gives you an idea that caves themselves can help us understand worlds that we can't get any evidence from elsewhere. And this is in Ireland itself. A remarkable archaeological discovery. County Clare cave has pushed back the date of human existence in Ireland by 2,500 years. It was once believed that the first evidence of humans being in Ireland was about 10,000 years ago, but now it's 12,500 years now. The discovery rewrites Irish archaeology and adds an entirely new chapter to human colonization of the island, moving Ireland's story into a new era. 2,500 years is a great deal more than we could have ever thought. Up until the 1970s, they only thought the people started getting to Ireland about 6,000 years ago. They didn't know anything more than that. And gradually, as the years went into the 1970s, in County Derry, they started finding evidence from a Mesolithic site that people were actually in Ireland 10,000 years ago. So that was great. But now we've got people from evidence excavated in 1903. So from this cave in County Clare excavated in 1903, they found the remains of a bear, and they find the remains of other animals in there. And they found a bear patella that was placed in a box in 1903.
If that's the case, obviously people migrated before the Ice Age.
Yes.
When Ireland connected to
Yes.
mainland.
Yes. Yes, they are, and that's the point. That is the point. So obviously people are not getting over there using little coracles and stuff. They're already an island itself. The problem is, as the ice melted, really, it would have destroyed. As the ice melted, it would have destroyed any other evidence in Ireland. So it's the caves that we actually look into. So they found this bear, bone remains of a bear. This goes on to say archaeologists were searching for really early remains from the Paleolithic period, but now 2016, this bone that has been in a box since 1903 was re-examined. And these were the excavations discovered at Alice and Gwendolyn Cave, County Clare in 1903. And it was left in a box. And why this is important is as follows, and we'll explain some of the diatribe associated with it. Before we get on to that, it says, when a Paleolithic data was returned from the radiocarbon data, so they had to cut a little bit of the bone off from the patella itself and get a radiocarbon date off it. Here we have evidence of someone butchering a brown bear carcass and cutting through the knee, probably to extract the tendons. Now I like the wording there, butchering a brown bear. It doesn't mean to say that the bear was killed deliberately for this. The bear was probably already dead when they found it, but it hadn't long since been breathing. The flesh was still fresh, and we know that because the cutbacks in the bone were done in bone that hadn't started to become lithified or in any sense. The bone itself still actually had flesh on it. So these marks are important. Go on.
Thinking naturally, is no evidence that that has been caused by butchering. It's so regular. If you butcher meat, you're carving away and cutting through. So the cut marks would be more irregular than that.
So the use of I'm glad you spotted it. The use of the word butchery is not these the word butchery. The archaeologists have put that wrong image in your mind, and that's what we're sort of addressing. Those are clear marks on there.
That could be a message.
That could be a message. But there's a point here. There is a very good point. There are 3 points to be made. This bone was radiocarbon dated to approximately 12,500 years ago. Fact 1. Those marks could not have been made in the bone too many days or weeks after the flesh started to rot off the carcass. Okay, so the bone itself was still fairly soft. It hadn't become lithified, it hadn't become it hadn't aged in any way, shape, or form. So they've obviously removed this, and these marks have been placed on it when the bone's still soft. So that means, and it was done by human beings. So radiocarbon date 12,500 years ago. There's bear in the cave alongside human beings. So
They invented the fork.
What's that?
They just invented the fork.
Oh, shut up.
How does that when I mash the potatoes? It looks like that.
What? Did you have little bits of bear bone in there as well?
They said that they possibly were looking for the tendons.
Yes.
Do they have that? Would they get them out in long bits? Do you for tie-in or anything?
Well, yeah, Bill's right. Bill is actually right. If this was actually butchery for the tendons, the marks would look very different. The marks on there look as if, and that's a really good point actually, Bill. The marks on there are really deliberately placed. It's not sort of any signs of butchery. These are actually, you could say, forms of art. But again, if you're removing the patella, there would be access to loads of tendons and stuff. So that all sort of makes sense. But we take it a little bit further. All this made sense as the location of the mark spoke of someone trying to cut through the tough knee joint, perhaps someone who was experienced. So those are marks of somebody who was experienced, who's actually cutting into the bone for whatever reason. And it goes on to say, in their repeated attempts, they left several marks on the bone surface. The implement used would probably have been something like a long flint blade. However, back to Bill's point, if this had been butchery, then they would not be parallel lines like that. Okay, they'd be deliberately placed in there for a purpose. This isn't just for butchery. This is for another purpose. And I think that's actually a good spot, Derek, Bill. A really good one. The bone was in fresh condition, meaning that the people were carrying out activities in the immediate vicinity, possibly butchering a bear inside the cave or the cave entrance. Again, the bear would have already been dead when they would have done that, because the bear would have taken out some of the people that wished to eat it. So anyway, that nice little bit. So the last bit we're going to actually go on to, there's two bits. Okay, so what I'm going to do, there's two bits, but there's a last big bit that I want to do. Okay, just one quick thing. This is from Magawa in 2010, Foxhole Cave on Magawa. They excavated in a cave that dated from the Mesolithic period. Carboniferous limestone caves at Magawa. Bone was really well preserved, and the bone remains of 6 humans were recovered, probably dated to somewhere about 7,000, 8,000 years ago. Their associated stable isotopes, they realized that the lower set of individuals that they found, there was a large protein value associated with them. The earlier individuals buried in the cave actually ate marine foods. Okay? The people later on, in the Neolithic period, didn't really eat many marine foods. So we got 2 sets of skeletal remains in the cave that tell us that the people being buried there had 2 different sets of diet, which is significant in itself. But there is something else as well. The floor of the cave has still not been reached at around a depth of 2 meters. So as they're cutting through all the layers, all the sediments, 2 meters down, they actually started to find Pleistocene fauna, evidence of animals dating back to 35,000 years ago. Reindeer, auroch, bison, collared, lemming. But in those layers, they found no evidence of human activity at all. And why is that important? The animals were obviously taken into the cave, must have died there naturally, must have ended up in the cave, been dragged there by a wolf maybe. But the fact of the matter is, we've got evidence, and we've got evidence in a cave not associated with human beings in these real lower layers. So let's go on to this bit now.
Well, I don't like caves.
Well, it's a bit late. We already did that.
I wouldn't go in a cave. I don't like them.
What about that royal? That's nice.
Anyway, shh. Cave and rock shelter sites are shelters, depots, landmarks, and tombs. Caves have provided a focal point for human existence for a very, very long time. You'll note that I'm reusing some of the words. And what we've got is that image that we saw earlier on. Caves preserve a record of faunas and environments, documenting natural changes, what's going on inside the cave. So when all that evidence has gone outside, all those trees are gone, all those human beings are gone, all those mammoths have been gone, evidence is found in the caves, sealed within the layers, not interfered with. Due to their relative stable microclimates within the cave, natural protection from the various elements you'd see outside has meant that this has enhanced the preservation of organic materials actually found in the cave. As such, archaeological evidence from caves allows a glimpse of past societies' cultural understanding of natural places in the landscape. So what once was outside, that picture that's been lost, that cine camera film that's been destroyed, you actually get evidence of it inside the cave. This is what we're saying. The inaccessibility of some caves also supports that specialist knowledge and equipment was used to get inside them. And there's a nice little bit of an example of that. Down on the Gower, if any of you have actually been to the site of the Giant's grave, which is near the Gower Heritage Park, there's a load of archaeological sites along there, and lots of them are caves. You get Tooth Hole Cave, Bone Cave, Cat Hole Cave. There's loads of them in that valley. And one of the caves, I think it was actually Tooth Hole, I'm not exactly sure. When the archaeologists excavated the cave, they found a boulder in front. I remember telling you about this some years ago. There was a boulder in front, and they thought this was strange. So when they removed the boulder, they found archaeological evidence behind it from a time when the boulder had already been placed into the entrance. So they thought, this is strange. We've got evidence that post-dates the time when the boulder blocked the entrance. The boulder came before the evidence of the evidence that they found behind the boulder. So they thought, this is really strange. And then they started rooting around and actually found there's a really nice tight entrance into that cave. People were actually making their way into that cave, which was blocked by this boulder. They were making their way into the cave, and they were involved in various activities there. And that's that point there. That's that upper point that we've just seen, that lots of efforts are made by our ancestors to get access to these caves. They're not always just accessible over there. Scotland has a wonderful record of caves and caves being excavated from the 1900s. Lots of caves are seen to be around the coast simply because they're easily accessible. Why would an archaeologist in the 1800s want to go into the Highlands to look at caves? After all, we're really not going to find much. But one promising non-coastal cave complex that has witnessed much attention is a place called Crag Nan Umma in Asselt Highland. That's not the right pronunciation, but anyway. Originally, it's in the Highlands, heart of Scotland, Grantham, that area, between Aberdeen and the Hebridean Islands, heart of Scotland. Originally interpreted as a likely site of upper Paleolithic activity. They found this cave inland. They thought it was definitely That's where they go in when it's really cold. But when they started actually looking at the cave, they started to realize from radiocarbon dating that the evidence in the cave was a lot later than the Paleolithic period. They've been using caves for different reasons for a very, very long time in the past. So they've been doing lots and lots of research in Scotland, investigating these caves, trying to get more information. And that's that cave which we mentioned earlier on. That's the image. And this last point here, which is a really fascinating point. As repositories of archaeological deposits and information through time, it is important the contents of caves are investigated in an all-embracing way, including the varied inputs of material into the cave, the study and analysis of all materials and their relationships. Tell you a little bit of a joke, but it's not a joke at all, really. We had this guy turn up at the Lancet Major class about 4 weeks ago, right? And I'd had dealings with him in the past. I'm not saying which dealings with him, but he was expelled from a bank. Long story. And he turned up in my class, and I thought, oh my God, I got trouble now. And he said, oh, hello, Carl, I've just come to sit in your class, right? And he was okay, he was well behaved. In other words, he had problems. He was well behaved, and he was okay, right? He kept winding this one guy up in the class. And then he sat down, and we were actually doing something to do with caves. It's only a few weeks ago. And I said about the cave in Pencoed. I said, I went into the cave in Pencoed. I don't think you were with me on that one, Bill, but I was with Michelle and Mandy and John. And we went to this cave, and at the back of the cave, there was a duvet, right? Big, white, massive duvet just dumped there. I thought a body was wrapped in it, right? And he said, oh, it's funny you should say that. Years ago, I went into the cave and left my duvet at the back of the cave. It was his duvet, and it looked almost as if it was new. And the point being is if you leave anything in a cave, it will remain there forever. It will slightly discolor, something will happen with it. There's very little life in these caves, okay? But overall, that'll probably be there in 10,000 years' time. So it will not have really decayed, which is a shame. It's all about this study to understand, trying to understand in the past, you see how things are today. You know, the odd crisp packet in there, unless it's removed, will be there in 10,000 years' time. It might slightly discolor and decay, but there you go. So all this is really relevant. Stuff today helps us understand how things occurred in the past. Only in such a way can researchers expect to understand the complex natures of these caves. Caves also act as good natural sediment traps and are significant to preserve deposits from the glacial times as well. Because what happened in these caves at the Paleolithic period, about 13,000 years ago, as the ice melted, these caves were used as massive funnels for the trillions and tons of meltwater to going into the Great Lakes and oceans at the time as ice melted. And they carved out lots of these caves, not all of them, and in them, lots of evidence was deposited in them. Humble jumble of information. The extensive investigation of cave sites elsewhere in Britain and Ireland has revealed a wealth of information relating to their use. The discovery of Cheddar Man in Goff's Cave and the cemetery in there at Avalon Cave and the carvings have shown the potential of caves to inform knowledge of funerary activity, practices, other activity, various processing, you know, knapping flints, and later on in the Bronze Age to make metal tools in a cave. Probably work out how that's done. If you've got a huge updraft, it might be really good for smelting bronze. And all this, and caves themselves are really difficult. So with new knowledge and with new lighting and new techniques, new things are being found all the time. And maybe back to the Holy Grail, maybe one day we might find a cave in Britain that is like Lascaux with beautiful paintings. And there's only one way that's going to be found, because it already hasn't been found. Because it's hidden there, it's protected, but we might still find something like that in this country. Anyway, that's me done. I can make up a little bit more time next week. Is there any questions?
Lascaux was like
Yes, but there were people in Britain, as we know. So let's just, yeah.
Right, many of these caves must have had some of these wonderful stalactite formations.
Yes, all that is made over a long period of time, and with stalactites and stalagmites and all the rest of it, we do find evidence. The stalagmites, tights down, lights up, so the stalactites form over. We've seen human remains actually embedded
The
tools in these stalagmites.
In these caves where they've got these wonderful formations, where there's evidence of Paleolithic occupation, the fact that there's no damage from these must have meant that people living there knew about them and revered them.
Respected them. Respected caves. That's the point. Even today, we do speleologists. They go into caves. They respect them. The speleologists are the people who are finding these things, and they respect them, and it's their love of the caves. Anne wouldn't go in a cave. Some people wouldn't go in a cave. They're not easy places for people to go into. They can be abused, but then again, everything can be.
That fear of animals being in there, I think, because the caves were there, before like man really, and I think bears or whatever were in the caves. I think I'd like inherited it.
They do in Pencoy. Right, has everyone enjoyed this today? Thank you very much. I'll see you all next week. 12,000 years ago, on the 14th of August of 1215. Dorothy, don't forget. We've got to do that in a minute, quickly. No, I want you to hold it up because I get the lights. Oh, Dot, we'll do it now. No more questions? Last it, job done. Anyway, Dorothy, you've got to hold it up.
From you or?
No, I'm going to come up close now. Because otherwise I'm not going to get the light.